Welcome to Chicks Who Fly, a podcast where we celebrate women pilots and share their aviation love stories. In today's episode, I get to have a conversation with someone who pretty much changed the course of my life. Let me explain. I was living in Los Angeles. I was making a living as a DJ and a vocalist, and I knew I wanted a change. And I knew that whatever I chose, I wanted to love as much as I loved music. During the time that I was making up my mind as to what I wanted to do, I started driving for a rideshare company on the side. And one day I get a ride and I pick up this young woman who was a brand new Part 135 pilot. It was LA traffic, so we had some time to talk, and she shared herself so generously and authentically, and she shared how much she loved her new career. It really interested me. It had never occurred to me that that was a possibility for me. So I started asking questions, and she started giving me advice on how to begin. I dropped her off. I followed all her advice, and I became a pilot and a ground instructor, and the rest is history. But it always made me sad that she got out of my life. She had a huge impact on my life, and she never even knew about it. So one day I told this story on another social media platform, and people started commenting, saying what a cool story and what a great community aviation is. And suddenly one person comments and says, I think that was me. She and I got to talking, and we take it to DMs, and we verified some of the things that we had actually talked about in the car that day. And so we verified that it was true. And I was just so excited to connect with her so that she could know the impact that she had had on my life. So, of course, I wanted to have her on the podcast because what she did for me that day was she showed me a possibility that I didn't previously know that was there. And I think that there are other women out there like me who would be good at this and who would really love it, but it just never even crossed their minds. But it could be a possibility for them. She was the reason I started this podcast. I wanted to share the stories of other women pilots and get them out there so that perhaps I could do for someone else what this woman did for me in that one car ride. So it's absolutely my privilege to have her on the podcast today and to have gotten to have such an amazing conversation with her. Of course, Jen has come a really long way in the past years as well. She's gone from fresh new 135 pilot when I met her to now flying for a Part 121 major airline. She talks about her non-linear path, shares her experiences, talks about the best parts of the job, the challenges of airline training. I get to share a little bit of what it was like for me at the airline that I was in previously as well. And she really does give some amazing insights. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. So without further ado, here is the conversation that I got to have with Jen Shull. Hi, Jen. Welcome to the podcast. I'm particularly excited to have you on the podcast today because of the role that you had in my becoming a pilot and the way that a chance encounter with you changed the course of my life. So welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm well. I'm so excited to be here. And yeah, I love that we're getting to share this story because it's pretty cool.
It is, but other than that, let me just get right into it. I usually start from the beginning, which would be when, how, and why did you get into aviation?
It was a very windy road. It was certainly not linear like most people's aviation stories, but the bigger portion of it was I had a regular office kind of tech job, which I enjoyed doing. And I decided to start flying for fun. And the bug bit me. And I just continued to learn and get my ratings. And eventually I was like, let's take a shot at this. And now I'm a professional Part 121 airline pilot.
That's amazing. Congratulations on that.
Thank
Let me
you.
ask you a little more about how you got started. So you were working in a normal type of office job in tech, you said.
Yeah, I was doing business systems analysis for different companies. I was consulting and doing contract work.
And what got you interested in aviation?
I do have a little bit of a background in it. My uncle was an aerial firefighter and a crop duster. And so I grew up knowing that he was a pilot, but I never really gave it a whole lot of thought for me, and certainly not as a career. And I was in the Air Force for a little bit when I got out of high school and did one enlistment with them. And I worked on aircraft in the Air Force. And so when I got out, I hadn't really made that connection yet. I was still young. And that sort of path of you go to college and you get your job and you work your way up the career ladder was really my exposure at the time. And it was great because I did get to go and have that life where you have the day to day sort of normalcy of a routine and getting to experience office culture and meeting a lot of people doing that as well. And then just satisfying my overall spark for adventure on the side. And it just consumed me and I decided to follow it.
I like it. Sounds pretty normal. We talk a lot about getting bit by the bug, and I don't think there's a cure for that once that happens.
I don't think so either.
So you were working full time, and then how did you start training? You did went part 61, I assume?
I did. Yeah. I did start Part 61 at this really adorable little flight school in the southern part of Portland. And it was a very good family atmosphere. It's family owned and they took excellent care of their aircraft. And the community was like a pretty big deal too. They had a fly in breakfast, pancake breakfast, first, I think, Sunday of the month at the time. And so you really got to know other people that were just good old fashioned GA pilots, and then other people that were also working to get to their ATP certificate. And yeah, so I spent a lot of time out there and I really enjoyed it.
Let me ask you, how long did it take you? You said you had some previous experience, and if you were working on aircraft, I assume that systems was not a new thing to you, which is usually something that takes a lot of us by surprise. It did me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly didn't know that there was so much involved. I knew it wasn't just, like driving a car, but the systems portion and just learning the technical stuff was like how everyone approaches it. And it's a new thing that you're learning. The previous exposure was somewhat relevant, but not necessarily. I don't feel like it gave me a leg up per se, because fighter jets are very different than a little Cessna. And yeah, so it did take me a while because when I initially started, I didn't have the intention of it being a profession. It was just something I would do for fun. I'd go putter around in the sky, of course, after I got my private. And I think in all, it probably took me like 10 years. But again, it's because I was just doing it for the fun and the love of it, which I still do now. I'm just getting paid for it. But that transition in my head hadn't really happened. So I think once I actually made the decision to go airline, probably took about 2.5 or 3 years because I was working full time, which I was grateful for that because it's what paid for all of my certificates and flight hours. So doing that all at the same time took just a little bit longer than perhaps someone that has the ability to just go all the way through. But I think it was about maybe 8 years because I think I started in 2008 and made the decision in 2016.
Very nice. And when I ran into you that fateful day, you had just started doing it professionally, correct?
Yeah,
And you had gone part 135 first?
correct. Yeah, that was the first gig that I got. It was for an essential air service company. I don't believe they're around anymore. And it was a great way to cut my teeth on learning how to fly a star and how to fly a scheduled route. Basically, they fly like an airline. It's scheduled, you buy a ticket, you show up at a certain time. So it wasn't charter or anything like that.
Gotcha. Very interesting. So, what made you finally decide to go for it as a career? What was that transition like for you?
People definitely thought I was a little nuts because I had a bit of a cushy job because I'd been doing it for a while. I was a little bit bored with what I was doing. Still grateful because it was allowing me to do some of the things that I really enjoyed, like flying. And I just was like, I don't know if you want to call it a calling or whatever, but there was a pull, and it just seemed like that was the time to try and go do it or never. And so I did, and I haven't looked back. It's been great.
Was there something specific that happened in your life that made you go, this is the moment that I want to do this?
I had a really boring day at the office one day, and I was just, if I had to open one more email or one more, just, I was really fed up with the boredom and the monotony of the job. And I had that option. So I just decided to go for it.
Yeah. I think a lot of us who are in aviation can really relate to that. It's a reoccurring theme on the podcast about how much we enjoy getting to do something different every day and with that view for sure.
Yes.
As far as your flight training, the flight training portion of your journey, I know it lasted a while and you got to really experience being on the GA side for a while. What was your favorite part of training?
Oh, that's a good question. The overall process is really wonderful. I think it's challenging, right? So it's not, there were tears. There were days where I was really frustrated and I was like, forget this. And I think every pilot goes through that. And I think that's a healthy experience to go through, because not only does it test you as a pilot, because then you can definitely see where some of your limits are, but it just tests you as an individual and you grow from those experiences. And sharing it with people was really fun too, being able to have that camaraderie with other students and to share it with my friends and family was pretty special as well. And I don't know if there was really one thing.
Who did you take up as your first passenger when you were in GA?
I think it was my mom.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And she actually was an air traffic controller in the Army before ILS was a thing. So it was really neat for her to be able to see the other side of it and to see me enjoy something so much.
That's wonderful. So then, once you started at your first professional job, what were you flying and how did it feel to make that transition into that world? What was it like? What was training like? Did you feel supported and welcome? And was it a great experience?
Yeah. So the first professional job I had, I was flying a PC-12, a Pilatus, which is a fantastic airplane. I love flying that aircraft. And it was my first job. So I didn't really have necessarily any expectations of how it was going to be. The training, the one thing I would say that was probably the hardest about my training was not actually any of the training itself. It was being away from home for so long. We actually had to be gone. I think it was a month or a month and a half away from home. And at the time, it was my cat Peanut and I really missed him. And it was also tough on him. He had some sitters and little nanny. And so I knew that he was taken care of, but that's always like on the side of your mind. And just like anything else, it was fast. You never feel like you're good enough. And I know that's a reoccurring theme with people in general, especially with your first aviation job, because you're like, wow, it's a lot. It comes at you fast. It was certainly much more of an aircraft than I had handled previously. So just getting the overall feel of it. And yeah, it was different in that you just go into this cohort of people that you hadn't met before and you're all going through this thing. And it was, for most of us, it was our first professional flying job. So a lot of us really didn't know which way was up. And there's a little bit of a fear factor too, because there are some places that still operate with, rather than fostering like a positive training environment, it's a more fearful, you've got to be perfect or we'll just get another pilot. And so that was a little bit difficult for me because I don't tend to operate well under those kinds of circumstances. Obviously, I made it through. So that was just a learning experience for me on different ways to navigate my way through those kinds of conditions. So I actually grew from the experience. There were some positives, of course, there were some negatives. But again, it was just one of those things that I felt was necessary to get to the next stage. Because then once I was out on the line, I was like, man, this is so cool. And it just, then you forget about all that other stuff and it makes it all worth it in a way.
Yeah, I saw that happen a lot at the 121 airline where I was teaching ground school. I got to teach indoc to all the new hires and the beginning of systems. And then everybody had a tough time until they got out on the line. And then once they were out on the line, they were like, yes, this is why we're here.
Yeah.
Some of those people have moved on to other airlines. Some of them are still at that airline. I stay in touch with a lot of the people that I taught indoc to, which is really exciting to get to be a part of their entire journey. Uh,
Absolutely. That's
yeah,
really special.
it really is. I loved it. And I loved spending hours in the simulator, throwing all sorts of faults and situations and watching people respond to the little tricks that the simulator instructors would throw at them. And it's pretty cool.
And like we talked about before, to me, that's so neat to be a part of that process because those things that you educated those people on or that you challenged for them to grow, that sticks with them their entire career. It could have been something that they had to dig back from their primary training and they're like, oh, I totally forgot. Like that's even an option. Or that you taught them a new trick or way to think of a solution and that goes with them. And to be able to be a steward for that education, I think that's the coolest thing.
It was really fun. I obviously going from a 172 to teaching ground school to Boeing 767 pilots. Understandably, I did experience some imposter syndrome at the beginning.
Of course. Yeah.
But what I noticed was that at first I'd be quiet when a question would come up during NDoc when we were talking about op specs and the procedures according to the airline, not necessarily just to the minimums of the regulations when it came to IFR approaches.
Right.
And what I noticed was that when I'd be quiet, when I had a question, inevitably 5, 10 minutes later, one of the other pilots who were thousands of times more experienced than I was would ask the same question. And after that happened 3, 4, 5, 6 times, I realized we all had the same questions. And the fact that I had fully expected to be out of my depth, but then I wasn't, it was a pretty cool surprise for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And you know how they often say that once you get your certificate, it's really just a license to learn. And we're always learning. And so I think it's fantastic that there were at least those questions being asked and people curious to still grow in their professionalism and knowledge, their aviation knowledge. And also just to validate that even people that have all the experience or wisdom or whatever, they got questions too.
They do. And it was definitely comforting. And some of the people who were coming in were first officers in training with a couple thousand hours. Some were retired captains from all sorts of legacy airlines with 50,000 hours, and some were somewhere in between. It was a time when there was a lot of quick hiring going on, and there
Right.
started to be direct entry captains into the airline. And it was a whole mix of people. And then getting to study ETOPS with them was pretty cool because that was my first exposure to extended flying over water and over places where there's no place to land, right?
Yeah.
What was your favorite part about the smaller operation before we get into the 121? But when you were in the smaller operation, what was your favorite part of that?
I think the community aspect was still a carryover from my GA days. You knew the pilots that you were going to be flying with. not to jump ahead to the 121 part, now it's like I fly with someone for a trip and then boom, you never see them again, or you may see them in passing, but even that's rare. So I did like the small company, small community grouping, and that was pretty special. And just the fact that it was that newness and that new chapter, that new entry. And now don't get me wrong, there were some challenges and some pretty significant ones, but those were more from a personnel level. And that wasn't really anything that I could control because I could really only control my behavior and my training successes and things of that nature. And to just be a good steward for our profession. You can't get down in the mud with people. And sometimes that does happen at some of the starter places. I don't know if that's really a good term, but yeah, it was cool. I don't mean to keep saying that in a way of I don't know how to answer it, but that's just my feeling. And that's what comes up for me when I think of that time. Is even still, I'm like, man, I can't believe I get to do this for a living because it's fun and I really enjoy it and it sets my soul on fire. And so I'm grateful for that entry portion because it really was like there was a Jen before professional aviation and a Jen after. And both great Jens, if I do say so myself. But it's cool to see how I've developed as a human and as a person and as a pilot.
I think that makes a point. I do often share on the podcast how achieving each milestone in aviation for me changes my relationship with myself a little bit because I get to know myself as someone who's capable of this thing and this thing. And I'm sure you experienced a lot of that at that first professional opportunity. What kind of routes were you flying?
They were essential air service routes. So they were feeders and go out to more less serviced areas, more rural typically to bring them into major hubs so that they could then go and take their flights. And then the other 135 that I worked for operated more like a regional. And that went from like major airport to major airport. It was an EAS. It was scheduled Part 135 as well.
Excellent. From the first 135, you went to another 135.
I did, yeah, to continue building hours. And that's when I transitioned to jet.
What were you flying there?
The Embraer 135, 145s.
Nice. What was the transition like going from a turboprop to a jet?
Probably like you would imagine. The first little bit on the simulator, you're hanging off the tail of the aircraft and you're just like, whoa, things came so much faster. But I do think having that turboprop experience helped because I was, at least I wasn't trying to learn how to fly a Star or a SID while also trying to wrangle a jet. I know people do it, but I'm just glad that wasn't the leap that I had to make. And yeah, just learning that power curve and how with great power comes great responsibility because just because you have it, you can get yourself in trouble with it. So that was probably the biggest part. And then just obviously how a jet engine, the spool up time and just some of those other little nuances. But yeah, it was a handful at first, but made it through.
Yeah. And here you are. So from that 135, did you go into the 121 that you're at now?
I did. Yeah.
So what was that like at first? Like the transition of leaving the 135 for a 121?
It was great because then you felt like you'd reached your goal, right? I had been striving to get to 121 and this airline in particular. And it was a little bit different because at that last 135, I did upgrade to captain. So having switched to the left seat and then having to switch back to the right seat and also that mindset a little bit was just, it didn't take too long to make that transition, but it was something that I did notice at first. And the company I'm at now is fantastic and their training is really great. And it was a very supportive training environment. It was night and day. And it was also really attitude driven as well. If you come in with a positive attitude and you do your best, like they're going to work with you. I didn't necessarily have any training issues here. If you hear about people that do, and the ones that had a good attitude tended to do a lot better and getting some additional assistance, and which I think is a good thing. And it was about 3 months, but I was able to come home which was just nice to be around my stuff. My cat unfortunately passed away, but so that wasn't the driving factor of needing to be home, but it's nice to be in your own surroundings. But it was a long time, but it was definitely, you needed it. And so now I'm on the 737.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask. And yeah, the 737 is a fast airplane. It's capable. And I don't know much about the Embraer because, like I said, I went straight from a 172 into a 767. So suddenly you have a mode control panel and the IRU and an FMS. I actually had to download an application onto my iPad to learn how to use the FMS with the Pegasus system, which is what we used in the airline. Like I did a lot of extra studying from the time that I was told I was going to start at the airline to when I started, starting by learning about turbine engines, which I had never flown. I still haven't flown. I just teach ground knowledge on them, right?
Yeah.
But it took 3 months. What was the experience like in the actual training? Was there something that came particularly naturally to you? Something that was particularly challenging and took you a little longer?
We also had apps too to help us learn the FMC because that's just like a whole other thing. Because the airplane will do what you ask to, but sometimes if you don't ask it the right thing, then you're like, oh, oops. So we had that as well, and also had a pretty cool app that you could touch the buttons or the toggles, and it would show you which systems were associated with that, which was a pretty neat learning tool as well. Some of the challenges that I had actually were, and it was with kind of the mode panel, and I hadn't had VNAV or auto throttles before. So that was probably the biggest thing to get used to because I wasn't having to do all those calculations. I still do just because of that paranoia of busting at altitude. But I know that there's a couple different systems that we have that show us whether we're on path. And we also have a really cool VSD, which shows us our vertical descent with the terrain and the crossing restrictions. I'm not sure if you had that on the 7.6, but it's a pretty nice tool. And the auto throttles it took me a little bit just to get trusting. And funny enough, the auto throttle disengage on the 737 is where the toga button is on the Embraer. So there were a couple times. So we set toga before we do the thrust levers all the way up on the 7.3, and the toga button is forward. So there were a couple times in the FTD where I had flicked and then all it did was kick off the auto throttle, but you just re-engaged it. So that was probably like the biggest challenge because by that point you already know how to fly a star, how to fly the needles, and all that stuff was pretty much the same, but learning the limitations and the flows. I think those are always a gotcha for people, and the profiles because they're just different from what I was doing before, and then the call outs and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't as stressful. Okay, so of course it's stressful. It's supposed to be. It's a training or it's an initial, but I didn't feel as much of a ding dong and I didn't have as bad of imposter syndrome, I should say, by that time because I knew that I was there because I was qualified and I had worked really hard to get there. And my experience showed it. I certainly made mistakes, and the way that the instructors in the training department went about correcting you was really positively enforcing not only just a good environment to learn, but they would positively also reinforce what you were doing well and what needed improvement. Because let's face it, no flight is ever perfect. And it's all in the recovery, right? So I learned a lot more that way, different things to put in my tool belt for when things go sideways. And as far as training experiences go, it was very positive.
Nice. Did you ever do flight instructing in GA before starting to work at an airline?
So I do have my CFI, and I was literally sitting in orientation at one of the flight schools in the Portland area when I got a call from the 135, when I got hired at the 135. So it literally just overlapped. So no, I didn't actually instruct anyone, but I think getting the CFI in and of itself was quite an accomplishment because, as you know, explaining what you know is a whole other level and doing it to DPE. So even though I didn't use it, I feel like the experience was really good and very challenging, but I didn't actually instruct.
That's actually a great part of the story. You're sitting in orientation at a school and you just skip that part suddenly and go straight to the 135. That's pretty exciting.
It was great. And I was excited to instruct too. And I know that's in a lot of people's stories. You got to bridge that gap somehow from when you get your commercial certificate to get to the ATP mins for Part 121. And I think that's a wonderful thing for a lot of people to do. But it just, for me, that transition, I think, was just a lot smoother and a lot easier having that 135 experience.
I'm sure it would be helpful as opposed to getting thrown in like a lot of people have at moments of high demand when you suddenly have a lot of direct entry captains and people coming in to fly a 757 that have never flown a jet before. So yeah, that's just more of a learning curve and it takes your breath away at first, but it's pretty cool because you learn. I don't know, for me, it was about learning what a solid base I did have from just being a nerd in my general aviation training, which I enjoyed. Where are you at now in your career in the 121? Are you a first officer?
Yes, first officer. Yeah. And I've been at the 121 for almost 2 years.
And do you have any plans of upgrading to captain? Is that going to be available to you soon? What are your thoughts?
As you probably know right now, it's a dynamic time and the hiring and movement and stuff like that has slowed a little bit. So for me, given that this is a second, well, actually third career, if you include the time in the Air Force, this truly is for me a passion job. And while, yes, it's work and all of those other things, it has never been a rush to get to the left seat or to go international wide body or anything like that. And we need those people because we need those pilots. It's just not me. And so for me, I'm definitely more of a quality of life versus now I have just enough seniority to feel somewhat safe should there be any sort of stoppage or recession or anything like that, and to still keep flying. Left seat, I would like to get a little bit more comfortable in the aircraft. And I know it's been a couple of years, but as you know, it's just a whole other mindset shift when you go to the other side. And while my experience as a captain at my previous company was great and challenging, I don't know if I'm just like pre retirement or whatever, but I just want to enjoy this. And I know it's a long answer for your question, but I'm not in a rush to get to the left seat. I know that my time will come. And I would much rather, a lot of people that I know, they'll wait until their seniority gets to a point where when they do transition, that they can hold a line in the left seat so that they're not back on reserve and they're not having to do that part of it. Cause I'm also a commuter. So being on reserve also as a commuter is it's a whole different ball game that would really interfere then with some of the quality of life benefits that I do get for being a pilot. So it's out there. I'm not in a rush.
I knew a lot of people who had the opportunity to upgrade to captain, but there's a whole other level of responsibility when every decision stops with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And talking about regulations and about safety and all sorts of operational decisions and operational control. And that the level of responsibility that it is to upgrade to captain and how a lot of people who have the opportunity don't immediately take it, not just because of quality of life issues, which are often a big reason for not taking the upgrade, but also because of making the big decisions and the buck stops with you. What's your favorite part about this job?
All of it. Let's see. I would say from a strictly flying portion, It's the best office view in the world. It's just stunning. The times where you're taking off and the sun is rising and it's coming in through the clouds and it's just like this orange that you can't, and no iPhone could ever do justice. It's beautiful. And it just reminds you of how small you are as an individual, but how connected we are as humans. It's just cool. And you're up there and your phone's off. So you're disconnected from the world for a little while, which I also find really enjoyable. And I'm sure that passengers don't see me this way, but on any given flight, we have someone going to a vacation that they've saved for years for, or someone going to a funeral, or someone going to see their new grandbaby. We have all these really major life events that are going on every single one of our flights. Some people don't want to be there. Some people are so excited. Some people are scared. And I feel really honored to be part of their journey in fulfilling whatever that is for them. And it's a great responsibility. And I'm glad that I'm a part of that. I think it's really neat. And you get to hear, whether it's just off to the side or whether people directly share with you a little bit about their story. And it's just really fascinating what other people are up to in the world. Some people on their way to an Alaskan cruise. It's pretty wild. And sometimes you're like, huh, I never even really thought about that. And there you are, just part of their story. I also get to meet a lot of really cool people, see some neat places. Sometimes the overnights are not really long enough to get to explore a lot of the places that I do stay at. So that's not always amazing, but whatever, that is what it is. You can just put it in your cap of maybe I do or don't want to come back here just based on your way en route to the hotel. It's also been amazing for me to get to visit with friends. I actually have some friends in Fort Lauderdale, Minnesota, Vegas, like all over. And I get to usually have a quick bite or a coffee or something. So I get to be able to see them while I'm also working, basically. Also, I really love walking in the terminals. And when there's that little girl that looks at me and there's this moment of recognition where that's a pilot and it occurs to her that she can do that too. And I don't know, there's just this wonderful feeling. I've actually been in the terminal standing next to an actual celebrity. This kid came by and looked at me and he like waved at me like I was a beetle or something. Here I'm standing next to an actual celebrity that I was talking with. I was like, wow, you get this a lot. Thank you. And it was funny. And we both got a kick out of it.
That's amazing. That's what you did for me that day in my car. And that's
Yeah.
literally the reason for this podcast.
And still to this day, it just blows me away that through like social media and just this chance encounter that you never think, at least I don't, that you're changing someone's life or perspective or whatever just by doing what you love. And you see all those memes and those positive affirmations or whatever that talk about doing that. And then to actually have it show up as proof of concept is it's mind blowing to me. And it's also just such an honor. And I'm so glad that we've also been able to connect again. Because like I told you the last time we spoke, like I'm so proud of what you have actually gone and accomplished with it. Because I hear people all the time, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but that they want to get they're interested in aviation, but then they never go and do anything with it. And so it's a lost passion in a way, which is a bit of a bummer. But like you went and actually did something, and we're a freaking ground instructor on a 7.6. That's cool.
It was an incredibly cool experience. And I remember getting there and being so sad that you had such an impact on my life and that I thought that you were never going to get to know it. So that's why I told the story on TikTok. And then when I saw your comment, and then we took it to the DMs and talked about things that we actually talked about in the car so that I knew that you weren't just
Some random.
that it was actually you. I just remember not only tearing up then, but every time I told somebody the story of how I found you on TikTok, we'd both tear up. It was like this really emotional experience to get to know that you got to know the impact. Because to me, it was harebrained. It wasn't even a thought in my brain that there was a real possibility for me. I was like, that's something cool that people with extra money can maybe go do. And I remember a lot of the specific advice that you gave me. And one of those pieces of advice, which I've repeated to you since, was it's too expensive to just go and do as a hobby. So if you do it, take it seriously and take it all the way. And in my case, I still love to fly and I still get offers from extremely experienced captains who worked with me at my first airline trying to help me get into someplace else to fly. I love ground instruction. And I know that for me, I'd be really interested in aircraft ownership and getting to do cool things with that. One of my favorite things at that airline was a lot of the incredible people I met. One of them being this other very experienced guy who came in to teach in the simulator who used to rescue dogs from the Caribbean islands in his airplane. And one of the things that always motivated me to learn to fly, even in GA, was to be able to fly for pilots and paws or other animal rescue organizations and things like that. So there's just so many amazing people and so many amazing ways to get involved in the community. And
Yes.
I never would have had access to any of that if you hadn't shared yourself so generously and authentically in the car with me that day. And so when I was a student pilot struggling to move forward in my flight training, I said, how can I stay involved in aviation and in the community? And so I thought, I have this background creating content, editing, I'm comfortable, and I like to share people's stories. So it just became a natural way of being able to contribute to other people what you contributed to me using the talents and the things that were available to me with my life experience. It's particularly special to get to share that and have you on the podcast today. What is some of the more what is the most challenging thing for you in your current job?
Commuting.
Commuting is tough. A lot of people don't know why. Can you explain that?
Yes. So commuting is where you do not live in the base that you are assigned. So I'm LA based and I live in Dallas, Texas. So in order to get back and forth to work, because all of my trips originate and end at LAX. So I got to get myself there somehow. So what I do is because my company doesn't actually fly between Dallas and LA, and sometimes it does work out where your company does, and that's great, but mine currently does not. So I rely on other airlines to essentially get me to and from work. And so what that means is I am a jump seater. And so I'm on the very bottom of the list when you see the standbys. And so I basically wait to see if somebody doesn't show and there's not a seat and their seat is open, then I can take that seat. Of course, there's other people that either have buddy passes or other priorities that are listed. So it goes by that. The one benefit that I do have being a pilot, and this is a share that all the airlines have, is I have access to the cockpit jump seat. So in the event there's not a seat available, I can actually sit in the flight deck. And that is often where I am, especially during summer travel season, which is fine because it's neat to also meet people from other airlines and just where they live in the world and hear their story too. So I'm on another airline's schedule. If they have any delays, weather, maintenance issues, anything like that, it does make me susceptible to having a little bit of a longer travel day or commute. So I typically end up going out there, getting a hotel to be in position for my flight the next day.
So it takes significantly longer for you to be away from home than if you were also just based where you live. Um,
Exactly.
and that takes having KCM and also being typed in the aircraft, or is that only specific policy to some airlines?
No, I usually end up in an Airbus, which I'm not typed in. So the type doesn't actually matter. It's an agreement that is with the airlines. It's the jump seat agreement. It's usually facilitated through the unions, I believe. I could be incorrect on that. But I do know if I have an issue, I go to the jump seat coordinator, who's then goes to the union. So I'm not entirely sure how that part of it works out. Fortunately, I haven't had any jump seat issues, so I haven't had to go to that person. So, for example, another airline person from a different 121 company can jump seat on my aircraft, and they do. And it's just a way that we all get to and from work around the country. Some people commute internationally, which I don't know that I would love any job that much. Like, we had some guy that I think commuted from Switzerland.
There's a guy at my old airline that commutes from India,
Oh,
which is a lot, but he gets to keep his job and to see his family and
yeah.
whatnot. Yeah, at my old airline, I actually did fly in the cockpit of a 767-300 from Miami to Puerto Rico to rescue a dog.
Love
That
that.
my mom had rescued him in the town that she lives in the north of Puerto Rico. That was crazy. It's a cargo airline, so we arrived at 2 in the morning, and it was 3 in the morning by the time that the crew vehicle came to pick us up. They dropped me off at a car rental. I rented a car at 4 o'clock in the morning, drove an hour to my mom's town, took a nap in her bed, went to brunch with her, came back, picked up the dog, went back to the hotel where the crew was staying, and then this poor little Puerto Rican stray dog flew back in the cockpit of the 7-6 all the
I
way back
love
to
that.
Miami.
I love that.
And then stayed with me in the crew hotel until the weekend when I took a commercial flight up to North Carolina to take him to my cousin's house. And she's been fostering him and giving him
Aw,
since then. But
that's wonderful.
that was one of my favorite experiences working at the airline. So, the last question I'm going to ask you for the purposes of the podcast is, do you have any advice that you would like to leave people with who are aspiring pilots and who would like to get into aviation as a career?
Yeah, I would definitely start with the medical. It could change the way and the focus of your path depending upon whether you could get a first class medical or third class or second class. And to actually go do an introductory flight. I know a lot of people that have gone and thought they wanted to be a pilot and then found out that they don't like to do that. So before you get too invested in making that path, just go and check it out. Also, make sure that you like your flight instructor. Just because the school issues your flight instructor doesn't mean that has to be the person that you go with, because it's really critical that whoever you're going to be learning from provides feedback in a way that is conducive to the way that you learn. I was very fortunate that I had a wonderful flight instructor from the jump, and the way that he communicated and corrected me helped foster my curiosity and learning, and it helped keep me safe. And he also started with a mindset, an airline mindset, with the call outs, the CRM, so that those weren't foreign concepts to me once I got further on down the road and was flying in a crew environment. So I think that those bases, when you're learning from someone like that, can really help propel your education as a pilot. And go and learn and spend some time with some of the old timers, listen to their stories, because there are lessons in there. And you never know, they could potentially save your life one day. because you will scare yourself. You will do something stupid. You will get down and be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I just survived that. And it will be some of the best learning lessons. So to just, I don't know, journaling is someone's thing or whatever, but to take notes of those flights so you can look back and learn from your mistakes, because you'll probably repeat them at least a time or two, but then you learn and then you move on. And to really enjoy the process and find a mentor, there's a lot of different mentorship programs out there. There's also a lot of scholarship programs out there because it can be really cost prohibitive. Also, do not think that you're too old. Like I mentioned, this is almost third career for me. And I started in my mid 30s. Actually, it was like my late 30s. So you've still got plenty of time, even if you do go to 121 before you have to retire at 65. And who knows, by the time I get to 65, they may have changed that. But just enjoy the ride and don't stop when things get hard, because they will. And I joked a little bit about the crying and stuff earlier, but I think that's actually a reality for a lot of people. And I know, especially for some women, that is just a stress response that we have because it is an emotional thing. It is tied to how we view our accomplishments and things of that nature. And just let it out and just process however you need to process whatever perceived failure, because it's not really a failure if you keep going. It's a learning lesson, and you're going to get a lot of them, and you're probably going to get a lot of it fast. So to humble yourself and get the ego out of the way, because you've got to get through the basics in order to really develop even the ability to have an ego. Not that you should really anyway, but you don't have the chops yet to really just be humble and learn. And it's the coolest thing, and I enjoy it.
Wonderful. I love it. Believe me, I'd stay on here with you for.
Me too. I love talking to you.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Chicks Who Fly. I hope you found today's episode as inspiring and motivating as I did. These stories are a powerful reminder that it's never too late to pursue your passion and make a significant impact in the aviation world. If you're ready to take the first step towards your aviation career, don't forget to opt in for our free PDF. It has all the information you need about becoming an FAA certificated ground instructor, including requirements and the process to get started. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode filled with more inspiring stories and valuable insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. Your support helps us reach more aspiring pilots like you. Until next time, keep dreaming big, keep flying high, and remember that the sky is just the beginning. Fly safe and see you in the next episode.